My cat used to run down the hallway at top speed and jump onto the bed every night when I would tell him it was bedtime. The day after he passed away, I turned the kitchen lights off and told the dog it was bedtime. Then heard the cat's collar bell and footsteps run down the hall. It happened a few more times and then stopped for years. About 2 years ago, when the dog got sick, it started happening again. Every once in a while at first, and then every night for a week, leading up to the day the dog passed away. 2 nights later, I heard the bell and the sound of the dog walking across the hardwood together. Then, nothing ever again. I feel like he came back for his brother, and then they left together. I miss my boys a ton, but I feel better knowing they're still together. When I was living in western New South Wales, I was out exploring the area when I saw a kangaroo with unusual markings. It had a white face. A while later, I mentioned what I'd seen at a local pub, and everyone got quiet, then quickly changed the subject. I find out later what I described was considered a bad omen in the local dream time, and I totally believe it. It gets a little odder. It wasn't a totally white face. It was like a white skull marking. It still had color on the ears and around the eyes and mouth. At the time, we were years into a bad drought, and it wasn't uncommon to find native animals dead in deep mud, presumably after attempting to access water. For some reason, when I saw the roo, I had a mental picture of it face planting into some mud, which had then dried, leaving the unusual markings. In a split second, it makes sense, but when I sat and thought about it, I knew it wasn't mud, but actual markings. I used to live up in New Hampshire, and for a brief period of time was having semi-frequent encounters with shadow people. At the time, I had a job where I wouldn't leave work until about 1 a.m., and I lived in a densely wooded area. For a while, it was bad enough that when I'd get home at night, I'd be scared to get out of my car and walk to my front door. Then one night I was driving home as I came around a big bend and looked up. At the edge of the tree line, looking right down at me, was a giant silver stag. When I say silver, I truly mean it. Not gray, not white. It even shimmered ever so slightly. He was massive and beautiful, and I immediately felt very calm and safe. I closed my eyes for a split second because I knew what I was looking at couldn't be real. And when I looked back, he was gone. I never saw another shadow person after seeing the silver stag, and a feeling of calmness came over me. Sometimes I wonder if he was some sort of guardian. I was walking my dogs once along our usual route, and we saw something odd. There's a few other people who walk their dogs here, but generally it's just you and your dogs. The route we go cuts through a forest and then cuts through the outskirts of a forest in a half loop before it cuts back into the forest to head to the start. One day, I'm walking my dogs, and way off in the distance on a hill, I see two animals come over the hill. My eyesight at a distance isn't great, and I assumed it was just someone else walking their dogs. So I leash my younger puppy and continue walking towards the animals. We get within maybe 150 feet of the animals, and I realize that they are not dogs. One's a red fox, and the other was a white-tailed deer that couldn't have been too old, maybe just a little older than a fawn. The fox is sitting casually next to the deer, and we approach. They both just stare at us. My dogs are both well behaved and didn't bark, just looked back. After a few minutes pass, the fox gets up and walks into the forest, and the deer follows right at a slow walk. They stay right next to each other as far as I could see. It's the strangest friendship I've ever seen, but it was amazing, and I didn't believe it at first. My buddy and I were driving home at 9 p.m. in South Carolina. Clear light, so no obscuring our sight. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a large animal on all fours, skinless, almost canine-like, that pounced on a neighborhood cat and disappeared as quickly as he came. I I continued driving and didn't say a word because I didn't believe what I saw. After a few minutes, my friend says, "Did you see that?" We still talk about it because there's talk in the southeast of a skinless predator, for lack of better words, is a cryptid. And there are no wolves or coyotes in our neck of the woods. I'm pretty big camping in the area, and I live downtown Charleston. I've seen coyotes on the outskirts, but this place isn't known for them. It didn't resemble a coyote on how it moved. My grandma had Welsh Corgi who lived to be 19. The week after they put him down, the next door neighbor came over and was surprised that the dog, who was very protective, didn't bark when he knocked on the door. My grandpa told him that they had to put the dog to sleep a week ago. The neighbor got really serious and said, "No way! I've seen him every day standing under the big tree in your front yard." We took this as a sign that he's still near us. One morning, my girlfriend and I were laying in her bed on a cold morning. We didn't have work or school that day because it had snowed. She lived in the middle of nowhere, like no neighbor for a mile in any direction. When I hear someone right outside the window say, "Get down, they're going to be able to see you if you don't get down." So of course it startled me, and I turn around and see a guy and 3 dogs right outside walking toward the garage door. So I grab my handgun and go to meet them at the door and find out why they're there. So in those 10 seconds I get outside, no one was there. Right outside our window there were shoe prints and paw prints in the fresh snow. I tracked them to the back of the property, and after about 100 yards or so, there was only paw prints. I look over to my left 10-15 yards. There were very similar paw prints that looked like they had come from the forest towards the house. So I tracked those up to the house, and then the shoe prints appeared about 25 yards from the house. So I followed them to see if maybe they'd gone out to the front of the property, but there were none. To this day, I'm not really sure what happened or what was outside our window. One time I was hiking in southern Utah along a sandstone ridge when I saw a pair of coyotes trotting along an adjacent ridge, maybe 100 yards away. This could have been a trick of the light, confusing perspective, or maybe me being tired, but I swear one of those guys suddenly stood up on his hind legs, looked around, and then sauntered down the opposite side of the ridge and out of sight like a guy going for an evening walk. I just stood there for a few minutes thinking, that was the weirdest effing thing I've ever seen. When I was a teenager, I went on a 2-day music festival. While I was gone, my mother decided that it was a great time to have the dog I'd had my whole life put down. She was really old, I knew it was coming, but I wanted to be with her. So needless to say, I was heartbroken, couldn't stop crying. As I'm laying on my bed, I feel this big whomp, just like when she decided it was bedtime. I could feel her curled up against my back, all warm, and I heard the huff she'd make when she got comfy. I put my hand behind me, and I could feel her fur. I calmed down and fell asleep. When I woke up, my dog was gone, but there was a big warm dent in the covers, like she had just left. When I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend called Mr. Johnson. I would talk to and play with him all day, and my parents mostly ignored it because it seemed harmless. Well, one day, while my mom was out watering a yard, a neighbor walked by and started a conversation. He said he was surprised that she moved in there because it was supposedly haunted, that the previous tenant had died in the house. His name was Mr. Johnson. After my parents got really uncomfortable when I talked to my friend, and I eventually stopped interacting with him. I also have a very vivid memory of talking to something on a curtain rod in the same house. Can't remember what we were talking about, only that his voice was kind of raspy and weird. When my dad came in and asked WTF I was doing, I remember the thing saying, "Say I'm God." So I told my dad I was talking to God, and the thought, freaked out, he gave me was hilarious, even though I had no real understanding of God or why that was such a strange thing to say. I was roughly 15 years old, lived in a house with my family all my life, and the house I grew up in. Anyways, my parents bought the house when it went up for sale due to an old man passing away in it naturally. 20 years later, we were looking at other houses and planning on moving due to the neighborhood changing for the worse. That's when weird crap started happening. Somehow, things started disappearing and relocating. Believe it or not, somehow a cucumber ended up on the sink in our bathroom upstairs. Then a rock mysteriously appeared in my room on my bed. And the worst of it was one morning I was awoken by a very firm grasp on my inner thigh. No one was home and it wasn't a dream. Nothing too crazy, but I believe some type of spirit got attached to our family or something and didn't want us leaving. It certainly was real and no one could ever explain it. I once got a job to install a security system in an old house. The family that moved in there had a little 5-year-old-ish boy. The boy was playing around by himself and he would sometimes ask random questions to seem like me. I answered one of his questions and remembered him saying, "Oh, sorry, I was just talking to my friend." The mother poked her head in and told me that he had found a new friend since they moved in. She then leaned in closer and jokingly said, "It's actually kind of creepy." Well, later that day, the boy was in the kitchen playing. He was trying to reach a bag of chips on the top fridge. I told him he should probably get down off the counter and I could get them for him. He proceeds to get down and said, "Oh, my friend will get it." I just kind of shrugged it off. I went to kind of working the cable through the wall. All of a sudden, the bag of chips explodes on the floor. I turned around thinking the kid must have gotten back on the counter, but instead was on the floor picking up the chips. He gave me a look and said, "My friend accidentally knocked him off." I asked the boy where his friend was now and he points to the top of the fridge. He said, "He's right up there, smiling at you." I never got such a freaky chill in my whole life. Was sitting on the couch downstairs and could hear someone walking loudly upstairs. Problem is the stairs were on the other side of the room from where I was hearing this. The sound was clear as day. I went upstairs and as a 21-year-old, I fell asleep in my parents' bedroom floor that night. It freaked me out so bad. Next morning, of course, my mom is asking why the F am I sleeping in their room, and I explained I heard the stomping upstairs, but there were no stairs there. And her mouth just gaped open. Damned in the house hadn't been partially gutted and redone in 1989, 10 years before we moved in, and the stairs used to be exactly where I heard the stomping. I refused to believe my mom until we went upstairs, and sure enough, she showed me where there was an indent in the ceiling, right where the wall partitioning the room from the stairs would have been. I never believed in anything like that before. I'm still not sure I do. I mean, if I didn't learn the stairs had been there, I would have just thought I went a bit nuts in the head for a minute, instead of believing I was hearing ghosts or something. The remodel, moving stairs, was just too much of a coincidence. My childhood best friend had a Rottweiler, Tyler, who passed away a few years before we started hanging out. One night, I spent the night at his house and woke up in the middle of the night to a Rottweiler staring at me in the face. I thought it was this new Rottweiler, Rowdy, he had, so I went to pet it, and my hand just went right through it. I told him about it the next morning, and they said it was normal for them to see or hear him still roaming around the house every once in a while. This happened when I was 6, and I'm nearly 50 now, so my memory is a little hazy. I had a friend the same age called Kelly. We used to hang out together and the other children who lived in our block and local area. One afternoon, Kelly knocked on my door. I answered, and she asked if I could go to the corner shop with her to get some bananas so we could make a milkshake. Before I could answer, my stepmother called me downstairs to say I had to clean my room and was not going anywhere. Kelly kind of shrugged and said she was going anyway. That was the last I saw of her. Early evening came, and her mother had knocked on every door looking for her. All the dads got together and went looking for her. It got later and later, and when I went to bed, she still had not been found. In the early hours of the morning, I hear a noise outside my bedroom window, a kind of intermittent moaning. When I looked out, I saw a policeman was sat on the wall, sobbing, being comforted by another policeman. I watched for a while and then went downstairs. My dad told me Kelly had been found dead in a copse in front of our block. I later found out Kelly had been murdered by one of the older boys who hung out with us. I had to give a statement as I seen Kelly that day. Later, police fed back that Kelly had been killed hours before she knocked on my door, and that my recollection of events was impossible. The man who owned the corner shop said Kelly had never gone to buy bananas. I'm pretty sure the police thought I was lying, and my mother was either lying as well or mistaken what she'd heard. From that time onward, I believed that Kelly came to visit one more time before she left for good. And since the idea of the paranormal just seemed normal. My aunt used to live in an old pre-Civil War house. The upstairs gave off a really creepy vibe to it. It wasn't used, so no one had any reason to go up there. A lot of time her and I would just run errands, and we'd come back and all the lights would be on, upstairs in every room. Mind you, she lived alone. Well, one night we both walked up there, turned them off, and as we rounded the corner of the steps, we saw an old man at the top, and he vanished right in front of both of us. My aunt and I both hightailed it out of there as fast as we could. I didn't stay the night with her again until she moved out of that place. I have a ghost that follows me. Not haunts, but follows. She will close doors, F with lights, makes my room colder, makes noises. Sometimes I see her in my dreams. All kinds of crap. Most people don't believe me when I try to tell them, which is fine, but she does not like to be ignored. She will make herself known. She has done me no harm, so I respect her and am grateful for all she's done for me. She's followed me across states when I've moved multiple times. When my sister was a baby, she was always crying, would not sleep through the night while she was in a bed with my mom. My stepfather worked nights at a hospital, so he was not there when this occurred. Mom told me she woke up because she felt a hard, bony finger tapping on her shoulder. She woke up with a start to this finger and realized in the night she had rolled on top of my sister and was suffocating her. If she had not woke up, my sister probably would have died. My mom turned around in a panic, thinking my stepdad had come home early and poked her to wake up. But he was not there. He was not there till the next morning. She swears to this day that an angel tapped her to wake her up, to save my sister. Saw a guy with a shotgun in my house. My brother and I were sleeping in the TV lounge. Woke up and saw a guy with a shotgun near the front door. I thought it was a dream, but just in case I woke my bro up and asked him, "Who is that?" The guy heard us and ran out. We were 7 and 8 years old at the time. A bear's nose pressed against my tent. I politely asked him to go away, and he did. I slept the rest of the night in my car. I live in a ground-level studio. My bed is near the window. I reached to turn off the bedside lamp and saw someone in a white hoodie through the gap of the blinds. I went, "What the hell?" Moved closer to get a better look and hopefully scare the creeper off. The person in the hoodie aggressively moved closer and put his face directly in the blind gap. I jumped back and he ran away. Installed a security camera the very next day. I was about 5 and had just moved. I was in my bed, looking up, waiting to fall asleep, when Two-Eyed peered from the effing air vent right at me. I was told it was just my imagination. 10 years later, when we replaced the air conditioning unit, one of the guys found a snakeskin shedding in the old air shaft. When I was about 10, I woke up in the middle of the night to what I thought was my dad watching something about trains, which was turned up really loud. There were lights and shadows, and again, just the sound of like a train coming and going. It wasn't sleep paralysis. I've had that, and I couldn't move. Bright white light, and just a noise. I hid under the covers, scared. I asked the next day, and nobody was up or heard what I did. My original Xbox scared the ever-living crap out of me once, as an adult. I left my original Xbox plugged in and idling on the home screen and went to sleep. I woke up later to hear ghostly voices mumbling and talking to each other coming from the TV. It sounded like an EVP from those crappy ghost shows where you can hear its voice but not what it's really saying. And to top it all off, over the voices were scary mechanical sound effects and spooky music. I have never, never, left an Xbox idling since. One night, when we were in the 5th grade, my sister and I were hanging out in my bed with the lights out before we went to sleep in our separate rooms. We would do this sometimes and goof around and chat when we were supposed to be asleep. There was a parking lot with street lights about 20 feet from my windows, and it would cast quite a bit of light on my wall every night. Never thought anything of it until this night. As we were laying in the bed chatting, one of us noticed that the silhouette of a man's head was suddenly prominent against the wall. The best way I could describe the visual is when you see old bits where they have sheet hanging in front of a light and do silly things with shadows. Except this was a shadow cast on my wall from a man looking into my bedroom window. Obviously, we're freaked the F out and both crept into the corner of the bed under the covers. The shadow just stayed there for what felt like forever. Just a man's head looking into my damn room. We eventually tried to calm ourselves down and convince each other that it was just our stepdad trying to mess with us. So we ran out of the room to see what was up, and there he was, just sitting in the living room. It wasn't him outside. We would have had to run around the house in a split second to make it into the living room. We told him what was happening, and he came into the room to see. The shadow was gone. He thought we were trying to prank him with our story before he saw how scared we really were. Never figured out who was outside my window that night, but it still freaks me out just to think about it. My buddy Billy used to live in an apartment complex named Southwick, and there were a lot of strange people. We would sit in the center cul-de-sac and watch the night come alive. I don't know if anything was paranormal, but those people were definitely up to something. About 3 a.m. on a deserted highway, I drove by what looked like a body wrapped in a white sheet, discarded on the median. I took the next exit, drove back, and took the exit, came back, passed it, and parked a little ways up. Still looked like a body wrapped in a sheet. Got out to go look closer when I heard loud rustling in the scrub trees median. So I jumped back in the truck, drove off. Pre-cell phone, so I didn't call the police. I looked in the papers, but never saw anything. My parents were driving us through a suburban area of Buffalo, New York in the early 1980s. It was late spring, I think. The windows of the car were open a bit. I heard a woman scream, "Help me!" No one in my family heard it. It happened again. I started crying, but no one else heard it. It still haunts me 40 years later. We live in a 150-year-old farmhouse. The first week we lived here, my iPhone was sitting about 5 or 6 feet away from me. Hadn't been touched in a while, like 20 minutes or more. And Siri just said, "You are in my realm." There is no history of the phone saying this or any activity. A few months later, my cat woke me up, waited at the foot of my bed, and kept meowing until I got out of bed. She went to the top of the stairs, waited until I followed. Followed her downstairs, and she just sat in the middle of the room. I checked a few things to make sure she hadn't caught on fire or whatever, while she just sat in the middle of the room looking up at the staircase. The house was so quiet it was eerie and disturbing. Usually something makes a noise in this place. I turned around to go upstairs and thought I stood in something wet. Went back over to check, and it was just a weird spot that was so cold. I thought my socks were wet. When I stood up, I felt a hand on my right shoulder. Nobody was there. Doors occasionally open, TV remotes constantly go missing. We lost, I think, 5 now, and never found one. Every single piece of furniture has been removed from the TV room during renovations, so it's not like something ended up in a void under the couch. 2 years ago, I was at a flea market and bumped into a former coworker I hadn't seen in quite a while, who ended up living just around the corner. She pointed at a couple and said to go introduce myself, and that they lived in the house in the 80s. I introduced myself and said I live in their old house, and they immediately asked how the ghost was doing. Apparently I had a thing for TV remotes back then as well. I was staying in an apartment over an old theater in a mining town. The apartment was easily 60 feet above the street. Women, blue-hued, in a long dress, just appears in my peripheral vision. I turn to look, and she does the same. We meet eyes while she pauses there watching me. She then walks across the room and out the front wall of the apartment over the street. I look out the window and nothing. I'm like, I need sleep. I mention this to the owner and he explains that there was a balcony there, but it was lost in a fire decades ago, where a woman died trying to escape said fire. Now it's a solid wall where the doorway was. He just added long blue dress. Like, bro, things you could mention in the housing ad. There were poltergeists in the apartment where I was living. We were 3 flatmates. One guy that did not believe in anything paranormal, and me and my best friend. I started hearing noises at night. Our 2 bedrooms were side by side. There was something knocking from her side, like something made of glass. We investigated. Turned out it was the bottles she kept in her room, shaking by themselves at night. It got worse later. Some of her clothes were teleporting to my room when we were outside together. One day I was spending a week alone there. I heard my keys shaking on the door when I was trying to go to sleep. The morning after, I found the strap, like 5 centimeters long, of my keys completely and tightly wrapped around the ring that was holding my keys together. Same day, there was a black mass in the corridor, and the curtain of the bathtub was moving by itself. I still remember the sound it was making on the metal pipe. Nearly got an anxiety attack. Called my best friend, and she came back early from her holidays to stay with me. My dad called a medium and a lady to make a spiritual cleanse. I moved into a house built in the 1890s several years ago. A few weeks after moving in, before meeting any neighbors, I heard heavy footsteps coming down the attic steps outside my room. I then heard footsteps on the staircase for the first and second floor, and somebody say my name. My husband was 30 miles away. Nobody in town knew me or had access to the house, and there was nobody outside at the time. I grabbed my baby, phone, and keys and ran outside to wait. We searched the house top to bottom and never found anything. But I've heard the footsteps multiple times. We have no upstairs plumbing or HVAC, so it remains unsolved. I've also heard music playing downstairs. Talking to previous owners, this was common. It's just a commonplace now. We don't always have stuff going on. A lot of major remodeling has been done, so I guess maybe that's why it's happening. Honestly, the repairs are scarier than anything else. My sister and I were just reminiscing the other day about this house we grew up in. We lived in a townhouse in a complex of low-income rental homes for most of our childhood. Very bad vibes in general. None of the 3 of us kids were ever alone in any part of the house at any time because we were just dead terrified to be. I peed the couch once because my mother refused to accompany me upstairs to the washroom. I was too scared to go alone. The house was built more upwards than outwards, so it was long, tall, steep staircase and long hallways. The bathroom was at the end of the hallway, and you had to cross the hall at the top of the stairs to turn the hall light on. We collectively experienced a few events ranging from bad feelings, recurring nightmares, strange occurrences, and apparitions. Strange events include my sister sleepwalking to the top of the stairs and screaming at the top of the lungs that I was going to die. She never did sleepwalk again. To her chagrin, I'm alive and well. Apparitions include the man sitting in the dining room table the morning of my birthday, the child in the stairwell window that had no landing to stand on beneath it. That was the only time we saw our parents acknowledge we had a problem, because we were looking at it from the outside of the house. We were in the driveway, all 5 of us, and our dog in the car after a camping trip. We stayed with family friends that night. I lived in a house once where the previous owner's wife died there. He left a bunch of furniture, including a rocking chair with a matching rocking leg rest. So one night, I came downstairs for a late night snack after midnight, and I was the only one down there. There was this rocking chair and leg rest just rocking away, all by themselves, in sync. I've had dreams of a lion that patrols my grandparents' farm. And now when I think back to my childhood, it might be a memory. My house and my house before this were both very old. My best friend's great-grandpa lived in my current one. I'll just say what happens here. Every day at 2:30 p.m. to 3 p.m., I hear banging underneath my floorboards. There's someone under the house trying to get help, or trying to get me underneath to kill me or kidnap me. I constantly feel watched through my windows as if my neighbors is looking at me while I'm dancing or getting dressed or anything. My dogs will be walking out of the room and just suddenly, randomly, look down the hall as if someone's walking there. But nobody will be in the vicinity or home with me even at the time. And just last night, I put my hand near the edge of my bed. Something that wouldn't move if my hand moved had moved and touched the palm of my hand. An apartment I lived in years ago was the scene of a triple homicide, drug thing. It had been about a year from the time of the murders when I moved in. The place was professionally cleaned, and the building owner gave me a great deal due to what happened. Girlfriend at the time, who I never mentioned the circumstances to, getting a great place, always said she was cold, especially at night. It could be dead of the summer, and if she slept over, she'd be under a blanket while I was on top of the covers sweating like a dog. She bought a candle from a botanica and lit it because she said something bad must have happened there. I never told her about the killing. Martha Jane, the woman who built my house in the 1800s, would creep up the step every night to check on her 6 kids. I would yell at my mom and she would say, "It's just a ghost," like it was completely normal. I'm at work right now, and there's many stories of ghosts and apparitions. Security cams in the plaza have been acting like crazy, and when it gets dark, I hear something climbing and crawling in the attic above. I remember driving my car to this intersection in this rural area, and I'm checking both sides because terrible blind spots. In the corner of my eye, my mother is sitting there and says something like, "It's all clear my way." I look back, and she isn't there. My brother has been dead for a few years at this point. It was also in the middle of the day. It's never happened since. I was working on my motorcycle in a dirt lot where I had crashed it trying to do a sick drift, breaking off the clutch lever and the gear shifter. I had brought a wrench set with me, and I was using one of them to take off a bolt when I put it on the ground to finish unscrewing the bolt with my hand. 2 minutes later, I went to pick it back up and it was gone. I ran all around this dirt lot looking for it to no avail. Luckily, I had a spare in the car, fixed the bike, and drove back to my apartment to shower as I was filthy. I walked in my room and sitting on my desk was the wrench. I was dumbfounded. Around 12 years old, I was watching Mega's XLR or something that was on at the time. Sitting there, I noticed the sun just turned off, like completely. I was really confused. Opened the blinds, it was dark. Show was still at the same spot, but the clock on the cable box said it was 5 hours later. My best guess for what happened was I passed out without realizing it, like those nights where you lay in bed and blink and suddenly it's morning. So I guess I fell asleep sitting up for exactly enough time to have Cartoon Network play a rerun of the show to get to the exact spot I fell asleep at. It was surreal though. I had just pulled into the parking lot where I worked and I was walking towards the building. It was like 3 in the afternoon, broad daylight. All of a sudden I heard ambulances, sirens start sounding. Naturally, I looked down the road to try to see the ambulance. I see it approaching and decide to watch it for a bit. It was quickly getting closer. It's about to pass right by me. However, there was a large SUV waiting to turn out of the parking lot and onto the road, blocking a few meters of the road from my view. The ambulance passed behind the SUV, probably about 50 feet away from me at most. I vividly remember the siren becoming completely silent in that instant. The ambulance had vanished entirely as it passed behind that SUV. I was so confused. Road did not have many cars on it at the time. It was broad daylight. I did a triple take and made sure I didn't just miss this. I had clear view of the road going both directions. There was no more ambulance to be seen. No more siren either. I walked up and down the road trying to find it for a solid minute, but nope, it was gone. I was well rested, not on drugs, and I didn't have hallucinations. It seems dismissible, but I was completely aware of what happened, and I can't explain it to this day. I was walking my dog, and I was almost to the driveway when I looked down for some reason. I looked back up, and I ended up being back at the road, about 6 blocks away from where I thought I was. I was so confused, but my dog looked completely fine. I was driving about 50 miles per hour, and a car ran a stop sign on an on-ramp and pulled out right in front of me. I remember bracing for impact, and I was about 300 yards down the highway, and I saw the car at the ramp in my rear view, just about to pull out. I once clocked out of work at 6 p.m., like I always did at the time, and began my hour-long train ride home. After I found a seat, I went to sleep and woke up just before my station. From the station, it's a short bus journey, 10 to 15 minutes to reach home. During the entire journey, I didn't use my phone. I didn't wear a watch, so I didn't really notice the time. When I reached home, my family surprised me with, "You're home early. Everything all right?" I looked at the wall clock. It was about to be 6 p.m. I was too shocked to understand what happened. Checked other watches, cell phones, and the time was absolutely right. A few days later, the admin emailed us the timesheets for the month, times clocking in and out. Every single day for me, it was around 6 p.m., so it certainly wasn't me having left work earlier. To this day, I haven't figured out how I gained between 60 and 90 minutes that day. 2 things, each witnessed by at least one other person, both while driving. Once, at a stop sign in the neighborhood, all these sparkles started swirling around in midair roughly 3 to 4 feet off the ground out of nowhere. A group of them were 2 feet wide by 3 to 4 feet tall. It lasted 3 to 5 seconds and they were gone. No one was around, and when I asked my passenger if he saw it too, breathed a sigh of relief and said yes. We spoke about it a little more and there's no reasonable explanation. The second happened when myself and 3 friends were driving down an empty country road, very straight stretch. A man on a bike appeared. Someone said to watch out for him, so not to hit him. Then he just disappeared. Our minds were blown, to say the least. Just poof. And he's gone. 1985. My ex-wife and I were sleeping. There was a small sliver of light coming through the window from a streetlight, so the room and bed were dimly visible. Our black Pomeranian was at the end of the bed asleep. I dreamt that I woke up, reached down to pet him, and he turned to a glossy, black, bivalve oyster thing, and opened up to reveal rows of gleaming glass teeth. I woke up to my ex backpedaling up the bed over the pillars towards the wall. I asked, "What's wrong?" She said, "What is that shiny black clam thing with the teeth at the end of the bed? Where's the dog?" We had the same nightmare at the same time. That still gives me a chill. When I was in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, going to Buttermilk Falls, we were being followed by a rotten stench. I think it was the grass man, because on our way back, it was gone.
Hey, I'm Connor from Bigfoot Anon, and I'm always on the hunt for the next big adventure. When you're on the trail for long hours, you build up quite the stench, enough to drive any skunk ape or yeti away. Luckily, I'm on the quest now for the solution to all my problems. Yeti bars. They do exist. available in tons of different scents and fragrances. Check out YetiBars.net for more and use my code BA10 for a special offer. Clean like a beast. Yeti Bars!
The flesh of the unguided and non-believers fuel this void.
Creatures over there! You have to beware! Please! Watch out! The big creature! The big creature! No! 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 The fish monster! Watch out! Please come back! Come back!